Hi, I'm James Bennett. I'm the director of StoryFutures and the co-director of StoryFutures Academy. Thanks for joining us for this panel on the special relationship. We're going to spend a bit of time talking with an amazing lineup of panelists about the way in which UK and North America collaborate, find ways of encouraging investment and innovation through R&D and through kind of like new ways of providing roadmaps for working with each other in an immersive landscape. I'm joined by a brilliant set of speakers who will arrange into the Q&A session, and I'll let them introduce themselves now from working on both sides of the pond. So I'll start more locally, but from a global context with Simon Downing.
Hello, my name's Simon Downing, and I work for Discovery UK, and I'm head of commissioning content for our UK channels and our D2C platform.
Thanks, Simon. I'm now going to hand over to Becky Gregory-Clarke.
Hi there, I'm Becky Gregory-Clarke. I'm head of Immersive for the StoryFutures Academy programme and for the National Film and Television School. So I work with James on effectively a big upskilling initiative funded by UK Research and Innovation to help upskill the UK creative workforce in the use of immersive tech. And I've been particularly working on a programme called the UK-Canada Immersive Exchange, which I'll talk a bit more about later.
Thanks, Becky. Greg?
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Greg Reed. I'm the Vice President of Technology Partnerships at Universal Pictures in Los Angeles. So I report into the CTO, and I support the studio from everything from production, distribution, and marketing. And over the past 4 or 5 years, I've been supporting a lot of the immersive media projects and working with many people on the line here today. Great to meet you.
Thanks, Greg. And finally, Mark.
Yeah, hi, my name is Mark Lever. I'm advisor to the creative industries team at Department for International Trade, specifically looking at inward investment into the UK, working with media companies, technology companies. Outside of DIT, I work on a number of projects which combine creativity, technology, innovation, international partnerships. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. So each of our speakers is going to spend a little bit of time when we first get into our Q&A talking about a specific project that they've been involved in that involves this, and I'm going to use scare quotes, special relationship between North America and the UK. And the area that we're particularly interested in is the way in which funding, research, development, and kind of like a multinational landscape come together to enable, the UK and North America to find mutually beneficial ways of collaborating, for the UK to position itself as open for the business of innovation, and to the extent to which it pulls on levers and triggers to do that successfully, unsuccessfully, what are the lessons that we can be learned from programs that we've run. And what are the kind of like, future landscape hold for a world in which we're all, working on online for this kind of international collaboration and the experiences of trying to broker relationships with creatives and commercials across the pond when you're not just battling the difficulties of the time zone, but how to actually create things without ever coming into contact with each other. Those are just some of the areas that we're going to explore over our panel today. The format of the session is very much a roundtable discussion amongst the panel, but we would very much welcome questions throughout the process, and we'll try and draw those in as we go on. So please do put questions into the hop-in chat, and our team at this end will fire those through to us. I'm going to start by just saying a little bit for those unfamiliar about the kind of like the StoryFutures projects within the landscape of UK research and innovation and Department of International Trade kind of collaborations. I know many of you will have seen Andrew Chitty talking just before this about the Audiences of the Future programme. And StoryFutures Academy, the National Centre for Immersive Storytelling, is funded through that programme to achieve kind of like one key thing, which Becky set out as to make the UK a kind of world-leading workforce in working creatively with new immersive technologies. So we're on a mission to kind of upskill our UK creative labour force into a world where immersive technologies are part of the workflow and possibilities of linear output, so virtual production spaces, but much more widely, how we harness the creative workforce of the UK into this immersive landscape that's emerging. And to do that, we combine two areas, essentially kind of like a world-leading training organisation like the National Film and Television School, where we're putting training in action into the hands of professionals. So it's very much aimed at current professionals working into live productions, experimenting on scaled production budgets so that they can see how their skills translate, working in an experimental lab situation in which there is sufficient budget, technology, staffing and resource to make it feel like a real world scenario, and developing particularly creative skills around writing, around audio, and from these, building a pipeline of talent from the learnings from that across our UK's universities to upskill not just our workforce, but also our university lecturers and trainers so that they can pass this knowledge on to the next generation of creatives who come into our workforce already able to think and work with immersive technologies. So this training aspect is very much about creating a really diverse and skilled workforce for working in immersive. But it's also underpinned by the R&D base at StoryFutures, which is funded by UKRI in a separate program called the UK's Creative Clusters program. And here we've got a really exciting role in connecting creative industries with a new form of academic research that is very practically orientated into delivering new forms of products and services, where the kind of like idea of writing a book or producing a patent or creating a journal article is very secondary to actually taking the research capabilities from screenwriting to dramaturgy to engineering to psychology to computer science and putting those in the service of creating new immersive possibilities in applying AR, MR, XR technologies. And of course, aligning that with some funding to grease the wheels of innovation and collaboration. And so these programs have been very much aimed at developing a new relationship between research and creative practice at driving growth in the UK. And we've been running now for nearly 3 years. And last year in particular, StoryFutures projects made a significant move towards going, the UK landscape in immersive is reaching a level of maturity that will benefit from much greater international exposure, collaboration, and potential inward investment. And those align very much with a few key people around this table today, from Greg's role in thinking about how North America invests and works into the UK, from Simon's role at Discovery to already being based in the UK and finding a better network of creative industries partners to work with that can help them understand the new possibilities of this immersive landscape, through to Mark representing the DIT, who are very much interested in, well, how can we create a space in which innovation is enabled with multinationals who are already part of our UK landscape, but don't have those kinds of relationships with both research and creative companies. And on our own front, Becky's driving forward a program for the Canada Exchange, whereby we could take our maturing UK creatives and find new routes for export and international true co-production for that industry to grow both creatively and financially. And these things all coalesce around the question of, well, how does that work? How do you actually increase UK investment in investment into the UK in innovation, in R&D, in a context in which, you know, immersive technologies and storytelling still remain somewhat unproven? So can we create a culture and landscape of experimentation, innovation, risk and learning that enables multinationals and UK to be part of a multinational environment. No small task, but it's something that we've all really been interested in trying to work around in a very much live research and innovation and training context. So hopefully that kind of like gives you a whistle-stop kind of overview of what we come together to talk about. And I want to start by allowing Mark to frame up a little bit more about this question that frames our discussion about how and why the UK is trying to make itself open for innovation projects, why this is an important strategic mission for the UK, and in what ways Mark, from his perspective at DIT, has been able to and been part of making that try to happen. Mark, could you say a few words on that point?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, James. Yeah, to pick up from your introduction, in some ways I want to take the one step back to provide a little context layer as to how we think about ourselves as the UK economy and where we see our place in the world. You know, what's the place of UK innovation when we're in a wildly globalized economy? We have this very accelerated production and distribution and consumption change. You know, and the change in COVID has accelerated a whole load of disruption as well. So when everything's moving, where do we sit in that world? And where do we sit in that world thinking about not just production, but also consumers? Because we're in the place now where the consumers are pulling as fast as the industry's pushing, and the change in technology means we have to be much more kind of agile. So we've always thought within DIT about how we strategically position ourselves. What's the UK USP? You know, part of that is that we are a scale market, 6th, 7th biggest economy in the world. We have existing excellence in creativity and technology. So we have the kind of the building blocks to base a foundation of innovation on, to then put the risk catalysts involved, which I think is what we're going to talk about today. But one of the key things about that is the talent pool that we're working on. You talked about StoryFutures Academy, you talked about, you know, Becky's work. You know, we have these existing skills in film and TV and games and visual effects, and especially in the immersive world, the ability to then bring in theatre and arts and people who think differently about content production when we're changing our platforms, I think is really important. And a big part of that is that our ability to think across platforms and our ability to be slightly unorthodox in how we approach these new tasks. And clearly some sense of lateral thinking and unorthodoxy is a key part of how we drive innovation forward. So we're known for our existing skills, but we're also known for creating products which have great IP development, great narrative, great design, great user experience. And so in this kind of changing landscape, being able to bring all of that talent and all of those skills to the table, I think gives us something which is slightly different. So, you know, the question that we've been wrestling with and working on is, okay, how do we exploit those raw materials, if like? What are the tools in that? Because we can't stand still, we have to keep moving. So what we've been working on is you've alluded to, is kind of generating these frameworks for innovation, generating safe spaces for innovations and models where we can innovate together, where we're providing the catalyst, we're defining the challenge and the problem that we're trying to solve. We're mitigating some of the risk. We're bringing a very productive network of views and skills and voices and research around the table. Very importantly, we're doing that collaboratively. We're trying to bring people together along with each other, and we're trying to join skills from different places to work in a very kind of open way. I think for me, the reason that we're doing that and what we're trying to achieve in that is kind of slightly multi-layered. First of all, we're trying to involve people like Greg and Simon and the bigger companies to help move the UK's kind of insight and experience further forward faster. Bringing big companies to work with and guys like this means that our innovation is very purposeful, and it's very and it brings a kind of global perspective to it. So we're trying to innovate commercial advantage or competitive advantage into the UK economy. Clearly from a DIT perspective, we're trying to expand the way that we work with companies like Universal, with companies like Discovery, to make sure that they are well embedded in the UK economy and they see the value of investing here into innovation and, again, moving ahead of their market. And then lastly, and importantly, we're trying to create opportunity for UK SMEs. So we want them to be innovating and bringing their new ideas into the room with a global client in a safe space and some mitigation to kind of prototype. So I think what we're trying to do is build on strengths and then create frameworks where we can create a win for everybody involved. And also there's a kind of underlying win for UK PLC to keep us moving ahead of a market, future-proofed, making sure that we are the kind of key creative economy. And, the key part of that is openness as organizations and, openness as a kind of global facing industry. And sometimes that's difficult. Sometimes that's the bit where, people like StoryFutures have to come in. But effectively, that's what we're trying to do. We have to keep moving UK innovation forward, and we have to do it in a kind of purposeful way with a global perspective and bring everybody with us.
Thanks, Mark. And actually, listening to you talk then, it made me think of last year. The years blur by. It doesn't seem real that it might have been last year. But last year we did a piece of research around UK skills to sort of help the academy focus on where skills were needed in the immersive landscape. And what you said about like the UK's position in the world's creative economy reminded me of one of the things that Peter Bazalgette said there, which was, he said, we don't make much of the globe's hardware, but we're the creators of much of the software that runs on it. And that demonstrable genius for content in the UK is one of the things that makes us unique. And I think it is one of the things that makes us unique, but I think it's one of the things around innovation that also makes it challenging. Innovation landscape and funding is often set up for technology investment or science investment, whereas innovation in cultural products, creative products, in content is harder to understand from why does the UK government invest in content in those kind of spaces, and how hard it is to potentially innovate in those spaces in a kind of live context where you're looking to drive business growth, you're looking to form new kinds of content for audiences to experience. And it's a kind of like, hopefully, a good segue to bring in Simon Downing from Discovery, who's been working with StoryFutures on an innovation project that's about content and trying to harness some of that British genius that Peter Bazalgette talked about, and why Discovery did that, and the challenges and opportunities that it involves. So, Simon, can I invite you to talk a little bit about that position and maybe frame up a bit about the Retro Hunter project for the audience? Sure. To understand where you're coming from?
Sure. I mean, it's great to listen to this and this whole notion of innovation. We all know that innovation drives transformation, but trying to innovate is just incredibly difficult. If you're an organization that has been doing things in a certain way very successfully for a long period of time, it's very difficult to change your mindset and ultimately change your behaviors. I think we're blessed actually in the UK, just building on what James said, in that we have we're a very creative country. Our creative industry is worth billions, and I'm blessed in having relationships with a number of fantastic production companies that we work with in order to create great content, in order to attract audiences to our services. But the innovation piece is really, really hard for us, and sometimes it's really difficult to kind of, I say, break out of your way of working in order to try and think differently to address a problem that you don't really know what the problem is or what the answer is either. So sometimes you just revert to type and you just carry on doing things as you normally would do. I think for us, the start of the project did actually have, for us, something that we really wanted to address, which is really about, in a world where content is ubiquitous and you can watch content on any platform at any time for any number of hours, how you can create a stronger relationship with your audience, how you can create a greater emotional connection with that audience to foster loyalty and foster engagement in order to make people navigate themselves to you in a much more efficient way. In actual fact, with that in mind, I think this is where AR becomes really interesting for us. And this is the project that we worked with StoryFutures on, because I think what we wanted to do is answer the question about how can we increase that level of emotional connection with our audience through our content, and how can we heighten that sensory experience. So with that in mind, we've been working on a project for a show called Retro Hunter. So just to take one step back, one of the secret source of discovery in the UK is firstly about commissioning content in the factual space. We don't really go into scripted. So once you move into factual, it becomes much more difficult, I think, to create that strong emotional connection around your content. So finding ways in which you can do that becomes really quite challenging. You can always go to the emotional side and try and ratchet up the tiers through your narrative. But I think for us, the interesting thing is we were looking at nostalgia. Because we're looking at factual, collectibles is a very important genre for us, and it is incredibly successful across all of our platforms. So we're working on a project which is about how can we take collectibles and how can we really ratchet up that notion of nostalgia to create that and heighten that sensory experience. So we created the show called Retro Hunter, and this is a show about following and understanding people's passion for collections, so collectors and collections, but the focus was really editorially on the 1980s and really popular iconic objects from that period: arcade machines, trainers, sneakers, whatever you wish to call them, and actually Star Wars figures were a massive phenomenon, as they are today. So the idea was to build a show around understanding why people collect and what they collect, but that to enhance that editorial through an AR application that you could use to watch, to experience alongside the narrative. And that was it was an audiovisual experience, but it really was about trying to just allow the audience to just dive a little bit deeper into the editorial experience, and we've seen that actually it creates a lot of positive outcomes, and that was something that I don't think we would have done if we were left to our own devices, and it was only through working alongside StoryFutures that we were able to bring this particular project to fruition.
Thanks, Simon. I'm gonna bring in Greg from Universal in a second to talk about a kind of experience of working with the UK economy in a similar way. But what you're talking about and what Mark's really helpfully set up for us is, I think, what has been kind of like, I guess, studied and researched and then turned into policy about the idea of like hidden innovation, that we have in the UK, this creative workforce and creative industries who are great innovators, as you said, Simon, about like, factual storytelling. And, factual storytelling in the UK is where you come to make great factual storytelling formats that sell internationally. If that's kind of like one of the geniuses of British creative content makers. And one of the interesting things about, the kind of work that we're trying to do here is, how do you take that creative thinking outside of, how do you take the innovation framework outside of technology, where it tends to focus on, the actual technology itself, and focus on the creative application of that. And policy tends to not focus on that, tends to focus on the technology side of things. And so here we've got these programs stimulated by policy interventions that are much more about what you've talked about, Simon, is actually, can you create content forms, interactive content forms and experiences that really focus down on a new relationship with audiences as a kind of innovation, where you're trying to engage in a new, psychological relationship and a new emotional relationship with audiences by great storytelling that harnesses technology. And that hidden innovation is I think, one of the interesting things about this special relationship is, how can, traditional frameworks don't think in that way. So how can we stimulate investment and collaboration internationally and actually recognize and fuel it and provide the first lubrication of that kind of relationship? And Greg, you've had kind of lots of experience of working across that and trying to develop your relationship with the UK creative economy. I wonder if if you could talk a bit about one of your recent projects with Rewind around immersive audio that speaks to some of that challenge, and in doing so, I think one of the interesting things that you've worked on is taking a challenge-led approach to this that allows finding creative applications for technologies.
Yeah, certainly. And I think it's actually going back, gosh, this has been going on for 5 years now. Since I've been in the company, I actually met Mark at South by Southwest about 5 years ago, and was really on a research mission at the time to figure out how we were going to be more involved in the immersive community and working with the DIT and groups in the UK and tapping into that ecosystem. And ultimately what we ended up coming up with was really a program around challenge-led innovation. So, thinking about the challenges that our businesses are trying to solve that are related to, as I said earlier on, marketing, production, distribution. And, ultimately what we came back with was a structure, a team that specifically focused on solving challenges for our business. So, we kind of call it a startup in a studio. So in our studios, we have product managers, engineers, and a budget essentially to solve particular challenges. And what we're doing is matching our business challenges then with funding that we have, expertise that we have, and then the relationships that we've developed with groups like Audience of the Future and DIT. So it's very kind of nimble, agile in the way that we're targeting our resources and bringing in those relationships where it makes sense. You mentioned a project with Rewind. So it was actually an in-car entertainment project that encompassed a lot of different technologies. So everything from immersive audio, virtual reality, artificial intelligence. It was a real kind of mixture of the latest innovations. And at the time we were approached by a company actually that had a technology that was basically tapping into the movement data of the vehicle. So as the vehicle moved, you had essentially a real-time platform to understand where the vehicle was going as it was accelerating, moving, turning left, right. You had that information essentially available to you in a real-time manner. And the opportunity it presented was really to think about how we could leverage that data to build entertainment experiences for the vehicle. So, and we had our creators obviously were thinking about how do you build entertainment experiences for a vehicle environment. We didn't necessarily have the expertise or the connection to the production experts that were building content for this space. So Mark actually introduced us to Rewind. This is nearly 2 years ago now. And they've been doing a lot of experimentation to think about how you could deliver an augmented reality experience based on the movement of the vehicle. So essentially with that relationship and the technology that we found, plus the creative development team, we kind of set on this path of really exploring what in-car entertainment would look like in the future. So we built a project for the Bride of Frankenstein. So it was really a reimagining for the creative development team what the Bride of Frankenstein would look like in a immersive in-car entertainment experience. Things like journey time, how long will the journey take? Is it going to be 10 minutes? Is it going to be 15 minutes? How do you build a narrative around that flexible time frame? If the vehicle's moving and you've got a visual that's essentially relative to the movement of the vehicle, how does that work? So bringing in things like virtual production and game engine technology was part of it. And then obviously, because we're looking at what does this mean for our consumers and our future audiences, it's really trying to understand from a business perspective, if this was available, what would they like, what would they want to consume as a product. So that was really the project, and that was really the framing, and ultimately the relationships that we captured through Mark was instrumental in solving that problem.
Thanks, Greg. I think it's kind of it's really interesting to hear that kind of like what pushes the wheels forward for collaboration. We're starting to get a few we're starting to get a few questions coming in from the floor that push on that. And one of them is kind of like around just different approaches to innovation across the pond that may be in play. And before I throw over to Becky, Greg, I wanted to just sort of see if you had a perspective on that, whether, working over in the West Coast, whether you've got a sense of, we work with the UK because there's a different framework for innovation and investment that we couldn't facilitate in the US. Is that one of the attractions that the UK is starting to open up a different way of thinking about innovation?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to kind of hone in on one project as well, because we're doing things with, you mentioned immersive audio. There's some other projects we're doing with another company, Darkfield, but it's everything from virtual production, engine technology, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality, all these topics. As we're approaching them, it's every time we do one of these projects, there's several UK companies in the mix, because the expertise is in the UK, and obviously from a North America perspective, language barriers don't really exist, and you kind of there's another market for us to tap into. So I think it's not anything's easy, but it's another opportunity for us to explore and tap into some talent.
Thanks, Greg. So I'm going to throw over to Becky now with a question we've got from the floor from Martina Dubrovnica, who asks about how the shift to remote working and working from home has impacted building international relationships. And that felt like the perfect question to speak to somebody who's been experiencing that firsthand for the last, 5-6 months? Well, I know it's longer than that, Becky, but I'll let you explain.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it's a very good question. So it probably helps if I give a bit of context. So the UK Canada Immersive Exchange programme, I think a bit different from some of the projects we've heard about so far on the panel, just because this one's focused very much at more independent creators, smaller companies, creatives looking to do innovation in sort of arts and media sector, and particularly because we've been working with Canada, and both countries of course have a great history in publicly funded, publicly supported arts and culture as well, which was really actually crucial to being able to put the programme together, because it was a partnership between ourselves at StoryFutures Academy, Arts Council England in the UK, and then Canada Media Fund, Canadian Film Centre, and Canada Council for the Arts in Canada. And we're all different organisations. We actually all work, quite differently, slightly different remits, but we do kind of have a lot of the same values at our core, which I think is really crucial. But essentially, we put together, in a nutshell, a 2-stage process innovation programme. We took on 24 creatives, 12 in the UK and 12 in Canada, absolutely brilliant, talented people, to do, first of all, a sort of talent development programme to help share experiences around international collaboration and co-production, and I guess help prepare people for doing these kinds of projects. And then there's a ring-fenced commission fund that they can then pitch to. We're right at that point now, about to make those awards. And we put it together really because, we can see from where we are that there are so many, in the UK, there are so many small companies, creative studios of all different shapes and sizes working in immersive, who have a wealth of talent, and not only that, collaboration in general is just a necessity working in this space. I've rarely seen an immersive project that was the work of one company with one funder. That almost never happens. It's always a mixture of different talents. But nonetheless, an international co-production is really hard to do. It's inherently complex. It's got a lot of paperwork involved. They're expensive, and there's something quite exclusive about that. Actually, it's got a pretty high barrier to entry for really small independent creators. So that really was the ethos of trying to put this program together. And yeah, to come back to that question, yes, there's a lot of barriers in putting together something like this. We as the partners who put together the program, we've had similar challenges to the companies who are on the program, who are learning to work together as well. I never ever thought I'd be doing a UK-Canada immersive exchange without going to Canada. That's the saddest bit. I was really looking forward to that. But no, I've been in my flat the whole time. But you know, we've found ways. I mean, the main thing is that everything just takes so much longer than you need a lot of time for international collaborations to come together anyway. Obviously, we're doing a sort of accelerator program around it, which is a challenge enough. But when you add in, this, it can be really tricky. But we've found ways around it. We've actually incorporated, immersive. We've actually used immersive tools, social chat rooms and things as part of the talent development program, getting people to work together, making virtual worlds in alt space and things like that, just by way of getting to know each other. So there's been different things that we can do to try and address that particular problem. But yeah, it's been an interesting ride so far, for sure.
Thanks, Becky. And I'm just going to stick on that theme of barriers for a moment, as there's a few questions in the chat about what people have found of the different type of barriers. Greg, I might come back to you and then come to Simon, because you'll have had an even longer experience of working across the time zones and the differences of UK and US production cultures and spaces. What have been the biggest barriers for you?
I mean, so solving the barriers has been solving the kind of building solutions to barriers has really been my focus area. So I think I'm lucky enough that we've got a UK office as well. So having a legal entity in the UK is very helpful. So things like financing, contracts, all of that type of usual typical barriers that slow things down. That makes things easier for us. But I'd say the experience of working with UK companies actually, it's been pretty seamless. I mean, I think especially a lot of the work that we're doing is obviously development related. The idea that we can kind of have these 24-hour cycles really, where we've got kind of a check-in in the morning, and then it's looking at what's been done the previous 8 hours while we've been sleeping. It's kind of that you've got really kind of a 24-hour window for working. So actually, at least with working with UK companies, it's actually been pretty seamless. And you mentioned remote working. Well, that's what we've been doing all along with Rewind. It was everything was remote, bar for one check-in at the beginning, and same with Darkfield. So I think the common problems around kind of, as I said, setting up a project, paying for it, doing all of the kind of the typical kind of mundane tasks. We've put a lot of focus on solving that, specifically around pilots and setting up tests and proof of concept. So the typical kind of legal structures and payment structures that you'd expect if you're working with a big enterprise company or a big entity that's we're going to be working with for a 12-month plus period. We've kind of just built in expectations with our legal team and our finance teams that we can kind of be a little bit more forgiving when we're doing these kind of 3-month pilots and testing for very specific outcomes. So I think it's really just about setting up that expectation, and that's the same across the board, even with companies we're working with the US, to be honest. So yeah, there's not barriers. There are barriers, but I think just kind of knowing what they are and overcoming them, I think is the message.
Okay. And Simon, you've had a slightly different experience in terms of thinking about barriers from how you work into the UK ecosystem. Could you say a little bit about that? As maybe it wasn't a barrier in a traditional sense, but you've certainly found difficulties that having a program has helped unpick.
Well, yeah, firstly, of course, we can't claim time differences here in the UK with UK SMEs, which is a good thing. But outside of that, I think a couple of things really from my experiences. And the first of those, I think, is around the fact that, even working within a creative environment, and really when you foster creativity and innovation, at the heart of that you still require a strong and compelling commercial narrative as well. We work through a US company. We're very results driven. Finances are always at the forefront of our mind. So So again, it doesn't mean that creative risk is something that you avoid, but it just makes it a little bit more difficult. So I think that notion of it's a real barrier in order to even engage in a conversation if you really don't know what the tangible commercial benefit is going to be to the business. And sometimes, we don't have a seed fund, for instance, to go off and just explore and do things. It's not really the way we work. For every dollar we spend, we're hoping to get $1.25 back. I mean, that's the model of our business. So I think with that in mind, certainly being able to access funding, which can help shoulder the financial risk, certainly allows us, I think, to move forward with ideas. So that's the thing that really helped us. I mean, being able to unlock government funding, I think has certainly facilitated the entire process. It allowed us to really lean into this into this project. But outside of the money piece as well, the other question is about time and resource. We have we have a very small team. We're responsible for a large amount of output, and innovative projects, they require time and they require focus. And I think to be able to harness expertise from outside of your business to help marshal that process has been incredibly beneficial to us. And also we knew within our project on Retro Hunter, we knew that it was around to increase this sensory experience. We knew it was around AR, it was around VR. That's the space that we really wanted to move in. But looking at my team and myself, is we wouldn't have known where to really begin in terms of navigating the SMEs in the UK. So again, I think certainly working alongside StoryFutures has helped us, with their experience, has helped us really understand what the opportunities in terms of the companies out there that are in this space and are dedicated to these technologies, and have helped us really whittle down through all of those different companies to find the right partner for us, which was StoryThings. But I think that's without that kind of help, all of this becomes more difficult, particularly, as I said, when sometimes you're not really sure what question you're trying to answer at the beginning.
Yeah.
So I think having someone to guide you, to work collaboratively with you, has certainly helped us, I think, overcome those barriers that would have stopped us doing this project in the first place.
It's really interesting hearing you talk about that, Simon, because one of the things that it sort of makes crystal clear to me is about the value of the Creative Clusters project and doing applied research. Because one of the things you talk about there is the ability to find companies who can speak into the landscape of television and AR and work. And that was one of the key bits of work we did with you and facilitated a network of. And it's a big shout out both to the clusters team who put together the clusters program, which started with data from Nesta, turned into a program of creating these 8 clusters around the UK that are essentially like live research projects that are mapping this UK-wide network of innovation in lots of different ways across these clusters. And some are very actively mapping them, like the Policy and Evidence Centre, in trying to build more data analysis of what that heat maps of innovation and R&D look like. Others working much more closely on the ground with companies and getting to know them. And StoryFutures sits somewhere in between. We have a piece of work that really informed how you met these companies, which is about mapping innovation and business companies and then interviewing them and meeting them as part of a process of how do you understand the UK's creative economy and innovation and the impact that R&D can have on it. And that has a really long goal about, it turns into a report we'll be publishing, I think, next month or the month after about this, but it has a very practical application in the kind of way that you've talked about. Without that work ongoing, one of our researchers, Mariana Rolbina, and Mark Lysett, work on this, and they have this kind of like long-term engagement with companies, but also short-term, like, okay, let's find the companies, let's do due diligence on them, let's look at their backgrounds, let's map them into the AR VR space. And it's really interesting to hear that practical and long-term research come together. So I got a bit excited there about, about hearing how some of that research comes into action. I wanted to, the panel, a couple of speakers in the panel want to kind of like speak back to this point. Becky, can I bring you back in? Because I think you've got some really practical thinking about how we build from some of the learnings these programs have.
Yeah, I think it's been really fascinating pulling together this program. I think. I mean, Simon made the point earlier about how difficult it can be to break out of your ways of working, your existing ways of working, and that goes for every type of organisation of every size, I think. But I think we've all got work to be done here, from the content makers through to the organisations that support them. I've observed, I think. So, for example, something I've definitely learned during this process is how much systems that are in place to help other kinds of media projects, for example, around co-production. So whether that's the funders themselves and the type of companies they're used to funding, or the type of projects they're used to funding, through to the way tax credits are accessed, things like that, that work and have been built up around a certain type of media, aren't necessarily quite fit for purpose for new digital forms of media. They're not quite recognised. I think in Canada, I've observed in some ways a bit further ahead than the UK. They've, the CMF have been, funding international incentives for digital media projects for some time. There exists an explicit framework for supporting digital products that we don't quite have in the UK. But I think even so, we've all found that some of our existing processes don't quite apply, and we've had to adapt them. And adapting is absolutely fundamental to making these things work. If we were not flexible about it, that wouldn't have worked. I think ultimately, I think all of the organisations exist to support these things, can do more. I think. You cannot expect to solve brand new problems with the same old tools. Basically, you've got to change those up, and ultimately that's all in service, I think, of making these things more accessible. I said it before, but to stress the point, I think these projects are inherently complicated. There's a huge amount to gain, but they are complicated and they're hard, and there's a barrier to entry there. That is, I think, at the moment, risking cutting off a huge amount of creators with different talent who just don't feel that they can access these kinds of opportunities internationally. And the more work we do like this, the more we try and build on the stuff that we've all done here. I think we stand to gain a lot more for everyone, and open up access in a much more meaningful way.
Thanks, Becky. I think that's such an important point to kind of like make. Particularly in policy kind of like circles, that the sense of there's been a huge investment around the Audience of the Future project and the Creative Clusters project in innovation, and particularly around immersive technologies, and that now needs to be matched with some policy innovation to ensure that if we are going to be the world leader in immersive storytelling, we can take it to the world. So I think that's a really important point. Greg, I wanted to invite you back in on this discussion, because I think you had some further thoughts around barriers and opportunities.
Yeah, as he's building off what Simon was saying, I think one of the things that we've tried to do, as well, we have to do with all of our projects, similar to, as I said, what Simon was saying with the results and the business model. Everything we're doing, basically, we're lucky enough to have a seed fund for our project. So, that definitely helps a lot. But before we can spend any of that money, we need to go in with, the hypothesis, the challenge definition, and obviously a business model that we think fits in with the results we're expecting. So, if you think about the project I described with Rewind, I think, it wasn't just about building the creative, it was about delivering an end product. And it was very important for us to put it in front of consumers. So we also partnered with Ford as well. So they gave us basically 10 vehicles to add technology and content to their new Ford Explorers. And we had them available at the theme park in Hollywood. So we were able to leverage that asset. So you know, putting that experience in front of the consumers and getting their feedback on did they like the experience, if it was available, how much would they like to pay for it? Would it be a subscription model? Would it be a transactional model, or should it be for free? And it's a marketing experience. All of that data was extremely important, and I think ultimately that helps kind of set the stage then for, you know, what this looks like and how we can garner further investment from our own company, from outside partners in the future. So setting up all of that landscape, I think, and the baseline of what the project means from a scale perspective is extremely important. And you know, hopefully that leads to some sort of product and scale in the future.
Thanks, Greg. It's interesting to hear about that last point you're making, about where does it lead and how does the initial investment lead to further investment from the commercial entities themselves. And Mark, hopefully not putting you too much on the spot, but perhaps there was a question from earlier from Chele Shackleton, asking about what does the monetary collaboration look like? Maybe, you know, are you looking from a DIT perspective? Are we looking more for companies who are based in both the US and UK, or just US-based companies, or just multinationals who are operating in the UK? Maybe you could speak about it at a higher level, sort of from the Global Partners Initiative or your other work.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I suppose actually there is a kind of more holistic answer in that some ways. It doesn't really matter where anybody is, whether they're in US, India, China, or whatever. If we become the place to be seen, to be doing innovation, the place where you're bringing those skills together, then I think it's important. In terms of the flows of the money, that really, you know, we've got both versions on the screen, haven't we? We've got a version which is publicly funded, and if it's publicly funded, there's a tendency to want to have the benefit to reside in UK PLC, and therefore you're likely to have a UK company. Some of the Innovate UK funding would demand that you had a UK company. Whereas on the other side, you know, Greg bringing his commercial seed fund to it, doesn't really matter whether, I know he's working with a Scandinavian company at the moment, you know, it doesn't matter. He wants to bring the best of the best to his innovation and bring it, you know, and then bring it to market. And I think it's that last point that, you know, that Greg made, which I think is interesting, in that it's as much about the money flow. You know, we've pitched a million times projects where we say, we don't know what it's going to end up like, but it would be great. Don't worry, just trust us. And there's an endless loop on that of like, do it, go back, raise funds again. And it would be quite nice to follow some of that thinking of making sure that we've proved the ROI time and time and time again, to mean that we don't have to keep going back and raising the same money over and over again. And therefore we have this kind of continuous flow of innovation coming in. And so we don't have to worry too much about where the company's based. It's a long way round of not really answering the question. To answer the question, it doesn't really matter unless there's a specific criteria within the innovation funding itself that there has to be a UK company. For us, I'm looking for innovation everywhere, but I think we have a really, really interesting dynamic, which is shown on screen now. We have some very large IP holders who are looking at reinventing their businesses into a disruptive market. And we have people like us on the other end who are trying to broker into innovative SMEs and find the best way to do that and be the catalyst and the facilitator for that.
Thanks, Mark. Maybe one of the things then we could turn to, there are a few questions in the chat that I will come back to. So members of the audience, stay tuned. The teaser trailer, it's coming. The kind of conversations leading into maybe one of the useful things for the audience to hear about is this idea we've talked broadly around about challenge-led innovation and challenge-led research, and how challenge-led approaches to funding are enabling, you know, building of new relationships, investment into the UK economy, or vice versa. And Simon and Greg in particular, it'd be great to hear from your point of view about this idea of challenge-led research. You know, it's something that at StoryFutures we do a lot of, and I've kind of got a perspective of about when we try and frame it up. But how we frame that challenge-led research is really driven by the conversations that we start with people like yourself, Simon, and Greg, of what's the business challenge and how we turn that into a challenge-led piece of research and innovation. So maybe Simon, you could just talk a little bit about, you know, that idea of challenge-led innovation and challenge-led research that led us into a collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, you know, for us, it's trying to understand, you know, what the questions that we're trying to answer. I mean, certainly for us, you know, when I go back 12 months, the question that we're asking ourselves is that how we position, or how do we evolve our content strategy, particularly with the fact that we were going to be launching quite aggressively into the D2C market at the end of 2020, early 2021. And would that change the relationship that we had with our audience? And also how we could then use content in order to turbocharge our approach to marketing. That was another key consideration as well. You know, we haven't talked about it here, but as everyone knows, with the explosion in streaming, certainly over the last 12 months, given the pandemic, is that the rules of marketing have changed as well, in terms of now we look at funnel marketing in a way that we never really looked at seriously before, where we're looking at awareness and consideration and conversion in order to push people into your subscription service. So these were challenges for us that were, you know, were very, very front of mind. And I think understanding what those issues were really helped frame our thinking as to broadly what we needed to do. And I think this is something that really led us away from just conventional forms of content creation, and where we have got a very didactic style of we preach to our audiences, and this notion of how do we create a more two-way conversation and a more immersive experience for our audiences, I think was the starting point for this conversation that we subsequently had. And this was all murmuring in the background at Discovery prior to our conversations. And I think it was only through the conversations with StoryFutures that we really crystallized our thinking and suddenly realized what the tangible opportunity could actually look like. And I think that just then jumping on to post a project, you know, I think I mentioned earlier that this notion of understanding what the commercial model is. Everything is easier when you've got a case study, when you've got something tangible you can physically get your hands around. And, you know, that's what we've been able to develop through this project. But what it's also allowed us to do is crystallize our thinking as well around what the commercial model looks like and what the opportunity is as well. So in a way, we've looked at the challenge at the beginning, but it's also allowed us to emerge through the project with answers to other questions that we hadn't initially considered at the beginning.
Thanks, Simon. It's always nice to hear that you answer questions you didn't start out with. There's definitely some learnings in there. And Greg, could you say a little bit about like that challenge-led approach and you know that maybe the way in which you harness your seed funding towards thinking about those challenges?
Yeah, and it was interesting. Again, it's kind of historic, but the way we started thinking about this is the typical models were really, when we looked at them with our competitors, it was really about outside in. So, you know, taking technologies and trying to find homes for them within the company. Blockchain or virtual reality, augmented reality was the flavor of the day. You know, really thinking about, you know, how do we transform those concepts, those new technologies into things that are relevant and useful to our businesses. So it really was about, again, going from outside in to inside out. So what are our challenges? What are we trying to solve? How do we bring the executives and the business leaders that are thinking about those challenges to the technology and making them relevant? So, you know, that's really where it works for us. And I think, you know, the projects that we've done are transforming our businesses because they're actively on the ground solving the challenges with us and with the partners that we're bringing to the table. So, you know, as I said, the creative development teams, if they're thinking about virtual production or game engine technology, if they're actually actively in the mix using those technologies and understanding how those technologies can transform their business, it just makes that whole project much more valuable. And all the projects are flywheel. So if I think about the car project or whether it's the immersive audio project, they're all using different types of technology. So, you know, it may turn into something else. And as I think Simon was saying, as a case study, we can look at those projects and say, okay, what did that mean? What did it involve? How can we apply those learnings to different things, different challenges? So it kind of is cyclical in a way.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear you talk on those terms about how you turn the cyclical into something that's long term, but also the risk, I suppose, involved for you guys of close to market innovation. You know, you need to do that close to market innovation to get the case study in order to get the learnings, and that's it's a fair risk that you need to kind of like put your well-established brands or IP into a space that's risky with it to test that out with audiences. And risky also for certainly with the academics we work with, that it moves at a pace that not everybody can always work with. And that's one of the interesting things about the program, as well as how you unlock university research in a close to market context and innovation. And it's I would say for anybody getting involved, there was a question earlier on about British universities that I'll come back to about their role in innovation. There's a huge role for British universities to play in the innovation process, but it is very challenging to do so at the pace at which large internationals want to move once they decide they want to go. I think that's kind of like a key part of it. What I want to do now is we've got about 10 minutes left, and we've got a few questions from the floor that I'd like to turn to. And Becky, you might want to speak to this first one. Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot with it, so I haven't put it to you in advance. But it's essentially about the collaborative nature in working with Canada. I thought might be interesting. So Stan Mitchell asks, it's really interesting to hear about adapting processes, and he asks, does this apply to audiences and the reach about them? Does the work translate directly across borders? And I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the interactions that our creatives and companies have had about finding cultural translation, about what assumptions about audiences, about assumptions about working practices you found about bringing together creatives from different sides of the pond.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, because it's certainly true when if you're hoping to put together an international project, which usually one of the features of which will be that you've got a collaborator in one of it, at least two collaborators in different countries, different funders in those countries, and different audiences, and most funders want to know that it's going to reach the audience that they care about. So yeah, you've got this interesting question of making sure that you've got trying to make content that is relevant to either it's a global audience or also thinking about the sort of local audiences as well, and making it relevant on a sort of local level, but in more than one place. And that's a really interesting challenge. I think ultimately the kind of research approach and sort of fundamentals of thinking about audience and audience research for these projects is kind of universal. I think what's also universally true is it's often very overlooked and very it can sometimes be a bit of an afterthought, but I think actually building that into a project like this is actually is almost even more important, because you've got just different angles to that sort of audience reach that you're trying to hit, I think. Yeah, I'm not sure. I would just say I think in this particular context, it's probably even more important. The challenge you've just got is just trying to make sure it's going to be relevant, or you're finding the right partners to help you do it. It may be in more than one place, which is always the hardest part, I think.
Yeah, and I think one of the lessons for us for the Canada project has been like the importance of making space and time for networks and facilitation to happen creatively, where people feel that they've been curated, that they've been given the time and space and a clear direction. I think you've done that brilliantly with the Canada project to enable matchmaking to take place, which is a real skill for then actually addressing what's the audience, what's the creative processes that get to those audiences. Mark, you wanted to jump in with a point here about how we make this work.
Yeah, in some ways, I just wanted to reiterate exactly what both of you said from my experience of once doing it wrong, trying to set up a project which talked between the UK and Singapore, which we got half right. And it was probably my kind of naivety in that. And then a place where I got it right was I worked with a company called Watershed in Bristol on a project called Playable City. We co-founded this principle of the Playable City. And the thing that Watershed is great at is that co-designing with distant partners, building trust, allowing for local context, exactly what you just said about these slightly intangible elements, which are actually the core parts of making a successful international project. They're currently working between Bristol and Lagos, probably right now on an online lab, and so it's even harder on a kind of Zoom call. But it's worth looking at. They did a methodology which is under a project called Creative Producers International, where they tried to capture all of those elements of co-design, trust, network, relationships as a framework. So worth looking at. But I just wanted to kind of come in because I think that's so important what you just said, which are the intangibles of it.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. There is obviously quite a lot of learnings with inside DIT from these things, and I really recommend companies seeking to work internationally that actually picking up the phone to your local area DIT reps is massively valuable, because there is so much knowledge about these markets globally, and just some of the cultural nuances or the time required to develop into them, or going back to the questions, learnings about audiences and approaches to them. We wanted to end on a point around what's coming next for each of us in this global landscape. And then in terms of the StoryFutures project, one of the interesting things that's coming next is beyond the special relationship, trying to take some of our model into the Chinese market. We're currently working on a project called StoryFutures China with the National Gallery and partners in Shanghai. And going back to the question, one of the key things there is around audiences and the differences of audiences, and trying to broker a shared understanding of who the audience is for an immersive experience that we're trying to create. Then focusing down on demographics, and then understanding there is just a completely different approach to valuing audiences' input in the process of creating something, and allowing their voice to be heard, and connecting with those audiences during the development process, being very different from the iterative UK approach to what we're experiencing in China. But then finding ways of taking some of the great research that our colleagues in the team at Brunel University, Vanya Garage and Lulu Yin, working on UX design to help inform new ways of working in China to work with audiences. And so, that international collaboration of bringing together partnerships is one in which you share new cultural understandings as a result, but is again enabled by this roadmap that I think has been really quite amazing. Some of the support for creative industries on some parts of the UK government, not all, but in some parts, in this trying to facilitate these types of programs to build runways and roadmaps into new territories or into the UK for greater collaboration and growth. So that's one of the things that's coming up next for StoryFutures, is the StoryFutures China project, working into those markets and trying to build bridges for international export opportunities in immersive. Mark, maybe I could hand to you to say a little bit about what might be next from your point of view.
Hopefully more of the same, to be honest. There's currently a project happening with Warner Media and XR Stories looking at the impact of 5G on that business, on the production and consumption of content. So building more frameworks which create these very close to market challenges, and being agile and entrepreneurial in how we respond. I'm part of the Creative Industries Trade and Industry Board's Inward Investment Group, very clunky and very public sector sounding organisation, but a strand of that is about how do we future-proof creative economy in the UK, and how do we foresight trends that are coming and technologies that are coming. And that comes from partnerships and being close to industry. But I think it's about making sure that we can be agile, making sure that we're ahead of the curve, and then making sure that we're responding with policy or frameworks which help us move the industry forward. We spent the last 12 months doing lots of that around virtual production of big LED volumes and that change in the big film production sector and how we build an ecosystem and a framework around that. That'll pass. What's the next thing? We worked on Immersive together. How do we keep moving forward and how do we keep being agile and ahead of the industry as it moves? That's what I'm looking forward to.
You've already moved past virtual production, Mark. You can see right into the future. I like it.
Never stops, huh?
Very good. Simon, could I ask you to say a few words on what might be next for you guys?
Well, look, I think from our experiences, I think we've got greater confidence now, particularly to lean into more immersive technologies. As I say, it was a distant thought 12 months ago, but I think our business has evolved significantly in a very short period of time, and I think through the universal learnings, I think we can now apply that to some more ambitious projects as we move forward. So for us, I think this was the start of a journey, and that journey hopefully will continue.
Thanks, Simon. Greg?
Yeah, I mean, same. It's going to be more of the same. I think the period we're in now is just fascinating. I mean, I think to see how some of the projects we've done are now turning into, as a transforming our production processes. It's looking at how our filmmakers are turning kind of the workflows that they're used to working with into more real-time, collaborative, game engine driven kind of workflows has been fascinating to watch. There's been a lot of research on the synthetic media topic and thinking about how animation workflows are going to be improved and visual effects workflows are going to be improved as well. I think there's some really fascinating work coming out of that space. And then same with 5G as well. I think just thinking about consumer entertainment models as it relates to connectivity is going to be fascinating as well. So very exciting times and very lucky to be involved in all of it.
Thanks, Greg. And Becky?
For me, I think I would love to see some of the things I think that we've learned on this program sort of applied and perhaps used to try and lower the barrier even further. I think I would like to see far more smaller companies with these skills and talent that we know they have, feeling like it's not a really scary thing to do these sort of official co-productions with other countries, because there's really a lot to be gained from it. And I would to quote, we had a great panel yesterday on the same sort of topic of immersive exchange, and to quote one of our panelists and cohort members, Jaji Maravella, it's not about co-production for co-production's sake. It's it has to have a good purpose. All of these things have to be driven by a really good reason, if that is a business reason or if that is a creative or social purpose. But it shouldn't, if you've got a good reason, it shouldn't be stopped by a lot of process that's maybe a bit outdated or was not built for digital media and digital innovation in mind. So we've got to sort that out, and I think we'll see amazing things.
Only a small challenge for us to end the session on, Becky. That should keep us busy for the next few years.
We'll get on that tomorrow. Yeah.
It's 3:45, so we have to bid you all farewell. Thanks very much out there. We hope you've been interesting. Certainly, my room felt interesting. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I don't think I'll ever forget my first day at Factory 42. News of a possible national lockdown because of COVID had just broken.
We had actually launched a new experience in the Metro Centre in Gateshead.
Had moved into full production and ready for a performance in June 2020.
We had created and established an amazing story with Aardman. All our technology was in place.
2020 seemed to hold so much promise, yet all across the creative sector, the impacts of the pandemic were felt. And this is a story of some of the projects that were supported by the audience of the Futures Challenge and the Creative Industries Clusters program, and how even the best laid plans were disrupted.